Welcome to Centered, a show to keep you grounded in an increasingly chaotic world. I'm Alex C., and I'm going to be the moderator for today's debate. In this episode, we will be discussing the Electoral College, which is the unique system that the United States uses to elect its presidents. The debate around this system has been going on for hundreds of years, and it still continues to this day. Joining me today is Benjamin S., who will be arguing against the Electoral College, and Kelsey R., who will be supporting it. Let's start with you, Kelsey. Can you explain how the Electoral College works and why we should continue to use it?
The Electoral College was a system put in place by our founding fathers, and it is how we elect our presidents. So when you vote for president on election day, you're not directly voting for the president, you're voting for the group of electors who will then vote for the president for you. Each state has a different number of electors. That number is determined by how many seats that state has in the House of Representatives, plus 2 additional electors for the seats it has in the Senate. The Electoral College should be kept in place because it protects larger states from dominating smaller states in the election, so it really allows smaller states or states with a smaller population to have a voice and an impact in the election.
So you make a fair point about that, but depending on, because there is a minimum of 3 electoral votes per state, citizens within states that have smaller populations have more influential vote than citizens in more populated states. For instance, each vote in Wyoming would be worth 4 times more than each vote in Texas due to their population differences and electoral vote differences. So that is certainly an issue because different citizens are getting different values for their votes.
That is true. However, if we resorted to electing presidents by the popular vote, the smaller states would really be forgotten. The candidates would really only need to get votes in big cities with lots of people, so the smaller parts of the country wouldn't have a say in the election. Right now, candidates have to earn votes from all over the country, so no states are really forgotten in the election process.
Yes, that is true, that larger cities would have more of an influence, but through the Electoral College, different citizens have different vote values in a way, like their votes are more valued depending on which state they live in. And still, even though large cities may be more valuable to the presidents who are trying to earn them, everybody's still getting an equal vote within the popular vote. People in the rural states, they can watch the presidential debates to help them decide. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can determine how you want to pick your president without them having to make rallies in your state or focus on your state. So everybody's still getting an even vote, whereas with the Electoral College, it's not even.
Now, Benjamin, what problems does the Electoral College have besides that?
Yes, but even though a presidential candidate may have the popular vote, the less popular candidate can still win. In a study by Jesse Ruderman, he claims that a presidential candidate with 21.8% of popular vote could just barely get enough electoral votes to win the election. This is certainly a problem because there have been major elections. Every election is a major election, but there have been elections where certain candidates can still win, and this is certainly not good. I mean, 21.8% is not a lot of Americans. It's like about 1/5 of Americans. And although that hasn't happened, as far as I know, it could happen, and that's sort of like the fear behind it. Yes, I mean, there's examples like the 2000 election and the 2016 election where the majority of America wanted another candidate, but the other candidate still won.
I do want to say, I think you touched on this, it's very uncommon that happens. More than 90% of our presidents won both the popular and electoral vote. And I also want to say that using the Electoral College prevents a lot of chaos that might happen around election time. If we were to elect presidents by the popular vote, this would demand for a lot of recounts, and the whole process would take a lot longer. The Electoral College helps us to be certain and sure about who our president is going to be in a shorter amount of time than it would if we used the popular vote.
Yes, that is true. It would be a much longer process, especially with recounts. But even though it would be a longer process, that is a more extreme idea to just completely get rid of the Electoral College. You could still have it in a system, but modify it so that instead of voters voting indirectly for electors to vote for the president, you could have it so that different states would vote directly for president, and the states that choose a certain president would elect those votes to the president that they chose, if that makes any sense. Also, there have been situations where the electors that have been chosen to vote for a certain candidate did not vote for that candidate, so that is also a problem, although that doesn't happen often.
Yes, that is true. There have been instances of faithless electors voting for a candidate that did not win in their state. Like you said, that's very uncommon, and some states actually have put restrictions on that, punishments if electors do that, or canceling out that vote. I also want to say that kind of acts as a safety net for us. Say something big happened in between the time when the whole country voted and the electors voted that really changed a lot of people's views on one of the candidates, maybe even the candidate that won, then the electors could change the outcome of who our president is by not voting for that person.
Kelsey, the Electoral College system was designed for a world that still considered horses to be the best form of fast communication. Does its age pose any significant problems for the Electoral College?
The main problem then was a lack of communication or education about each candidate or the election in general, which isn't a problem we face as much now. So the electors in the past were there to make sure the people did not vote for someone that was unfit to be our president. You also brought up faithless electors. In the past, faithless electors have never affected the actual outcome of the election, and it's highly unlikely they ever will. But something that could be changed is consequences in all states, or things making it impossible or difficult for electors to vote for the other candidate.
Yes, faithless electors might never change the outcome of a presidency, and to be honest, they never have. It could happen in the future, but you said that people were less educated back then, and that is why they put the Electoral College in place, so that people wouldn't falsely choose a president because of their uneducation or possibly being a bit naive. That is less of a problem today because people are more educated, which is why a popular vote would be more suited for today than back then, because back then people didn't have access to the internet and they didn't know all the facts. And they couldn't form a decision as well as now, which is why we should have a popular vote and not as much an electoral vote.
Thank you for that excellent debate. Both of you did a full week of research on this topic. Were either of you surprised by anything you found out? What are some final thoughts you have on this topic?
Before this debate, I didn't really have much of an opinion on the Electoral College because I wasn't too well educated on it. I hadn't really looked into it. It just wasn't something I was interested in. I just thought that, like, founding fathers put it in, it should be a thing, I guess. I hadn't really looked at it, but now after I've looked at it, it seems that the Electoral College is it improves a lot of things that otherwise the popular vote wouldn't improve. So each of them have their pros and cons, like representation of smaller states. They both have their pros and cons. So I'm still somewhat undecided, although this did educate me more, I think.
I agree with Benjamin. I think researching this, I learned a lot more about the pros and cons of keeping the Electoral College. Like you said, I really didn't know as much about it previously. I do realize, like you said, there are pros and cons to both sides. If we use the Electoral College, then small states are more represented than larger states, and if we use the popular vote, then larger states would be more represented than smaller states. And I also thought it was interesting, a lot of the articles and researching I did brought up the fact that if we did not already have the Electoral College, nobody would think to create it today. It's not something we would have a need for necessarily, but the fact that we already had it and it was already established in our Constitution really affects how we think about it, and what, if we believe we should keep it or not.
Thanks for listening. The Center team worked really hard to produce this episode, so we hope you enjoyed it. If you are interested in doing a bit more research for yourself, all the sources we used while researching this topic will be posted on our website. And once again, the goal of this show is not to prove one side right or wrong, but to encourage discussion about the topics we cover. If you haven't already, check out last week's episode, where we debate the pros and cons of universal basic income. The next episode should be posted on December 4th. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.